Hey gardeners, welcome back to Classic Caladiums. I'm your grower, Clay Wallace, and as a fellow gardener, I'm always looking to add new things to my garden or possibly try something different. Maybe that this year will be Caladiums. We're putting together an 8-part series. This will be part 1 to help unfold some myths about Caladiums and let you know that they're not as temperamental as thought. So in this first series, we're going to dive into designing with Caladiums. Picking out your site, what considerations do we need to take into account when choosing our Caladiums, and then putting together a plan to plant in our garden. Getting into the height category consideration, we start off with straps and fancy leaves, and they tend to be a little bit different in height. Even though we list tall, intermediate, and short varieties for both, the heights change. On a fancy leaf, the tall is 16 to 20. On a strap, it's 14 to 16. Intermediate for a fancy is 14 to 16. Intermediate for a strap is 12 to 14. Now, most varieties on each strap leaf and fancy are going to fall into the intermediate category. We list a varying size difference here because depending on where you put them in your yard and the amount of sunlight and care the Caladium gets, they can either be a little bit taller or a little bit shorter. So you may have some of your intermediate turning into be tall varieties if they're in a little bit more shade, or if you really go out of the way and take care of them. Same with the strap. You may find some of your intermediates falling into the short category if they get a little more sunlight, or if you tend to water a little less, they may stay shorter due to the lack of water. So our next consideration is sun exposure. Sun exposure can be listed out as shade, part shade to sun, or full sun to shade. So for this example, we are going to call shade 4 to 6 hours of morning sun. That's from when the sun comes up to stopping somewhere around 11 o'clock. Shade varieties will not tolerate sun after 11 o'clock. You may see some scorching or some scalding of the black marks on the leaves. Maybe it looks a little off color or yellow. Shade also refers to filtered light all day long, real bright light under trees, under your patio, something like that, where it receives no direct sun, but it's real bright light all day. Now, all Caladiums will fall into this category. They all love shade. When you get into the part sun and full sun categories to where you start narrowing your list. So part sun is referred to as 4 to 8 hours of sun, most of that being morning sun. You may receive a pocket of sunlight around midday or a pocket around the afternoon, 30 minutes to an hour of more intense sun than morning sun, and we would call that part sun. Full sun to shade, these are varieties that can handle all the way from full sun to full shade. And they can handle 8 hours of plus of full sun tolerance. Now, here at Classic Caladiums, we love this category because we have our own breeding program and we breed for full sun tolerance. We would like the gardener to have the flexibility to have the same Caladium in the shade all the way through your whole landscape, whether it's the sun or the shade. That way it gives you a unified look through your landscape. However, when you get into full sun varieties, they will require more frequent watering. So maybe a heavier mulch. If you've got an irrigation system, set the timer a couple of minutes longer on this. And as you go further into the shade, they'll require less frequency of water. So the full shade ones require less than the part sun, and the part sun requires less than the full sun. Getting into our next consideration, it's going to be explaining the difference between fancy leaf and strap. We've already dove into one example of differences, and that's the height. So the main differences here, we're going to get into characteristics on what make them different and how in the world do you tell what the difference is just walking up on a Caladium. Well, I have 2 examples here. It just happens to be these examples. This is Scarlet Flame and this is Fast Flash. And I have 2 leaf examples here. So fancy leaves are going to be your more rounded leaf on a Caladium. It's going to be your traditional look. And strap leaves are going to be a more arrowhead look. Most people call these straps or lance type caladiums. But the way you can tell them the difference apart when you walk up on them is where does the stem connect into the leaf. On a fancy leaf, the stem is going to connect more toward the middle of the leaf. And on a strap leaf, it's going to connect more towards the top of the leaf. So most of your leaf is going to be drooping down from the stem on a strap, and your leaf is going to be exploding outward from the connection on a fancy. So for a fancy, like we said, we're going to have more rounded leaves. Plants tend to be taller. They're also going to sprout a little faster than your straps, and they're going to look better in large plantings in the landscape. Something where visibility you want from far distance, because they're going to be much larger than your straps. They're also going to make really good thrillers for combo pots. Long stems, big leaves, make for really good centerpieces on your combo pots. Straps are going to be about the mirror opposite. Plants tend to be shorter, a little bit fuller, and they're better for small spaces and hanging baskets and smaller containers. Now they also make a great filler in a combo pot too, where you could mix the fancy leaf in the middle with the straps along to fill your pot. Now that we've gone over some of the basic considerations when choosing caladiums, we now have to pick out a site for this project. So this project site is our patio out of the display garden. Our patio consists of 15 feet by 15 feet of flower bed and is in the full shade. This patio is surrounded by a lot of oak trees, so we get filtered light all day long, which is going to allow us to choose from any variety out of the classic Caladium catalog. But before we get started, we have to make sure our soil is in good condition for planting our Caladium bulbs when the time comes. So here in Florida, we deal with sand in our area. Sand is only one type of soil that you may encounter in the US. Sand, clay is another type, which is very prevalent along the central mid-south area of the US, and loam. You'll find loam in delta regions, up around the grain belt. The Great Prairies is where you'll find some loam. It's a clay and sand mixture. There's pros and cons to all three of these types of soils. Sand is low in organic matter, very poor nutrient holding capacity, but it has real good drainage, and that can also be a fault. Clay is very good in organic matter, although it's very compacted, good nutrient capacity, it holds a lot of water, but it may need pH adjusting. So to get clay into the proper condition, you'll have to till and work the soil. Loam is probably the best of all three. It's usually high in organic matter, usually pretty well drained, but some areas can hold water, and it has a high nutrient capacity. So to improve all three of these to get to the perfect soil conditions for caladiums, we suggest you work in organic matter or some type of soil conditioner for the sand and the clay. The clay is going to really need that organic matter to help break it up and keep the clay particles separate, so the roots can be well aerated and find their way into those nutrients. The clay and the loam both can hold excess water, so they may need to be raised up so the water drainage is better. And all three will need a slow release fertilizer. When designing a space such as this, we can do all one color, all one type of caladium with different types of caladiums in our urn, or our two combo possibilities here. Or we can do a multi-layer design with several varieties of caladiums. When you use several varieties of caladiums in a landscape, it adds lots of interest and lots of color to the project. And that's exactly what we've decided to do with this project. For our first scenario, we're going to choose from the Proven Winner line at Classic Caladiums. Proven Winners is our premium genetics line. It's got some of our newest genetics, some of our most unusual faces, brightest colors. So we've got Climbing Around, Tickle Me Pink, Lemon Blush, and Chinook. Going into another scenario, you could do a red scenario, red and white. These are classic Caladium varieties. We have Restless Heart, Peppermint, White Majesty, and Flare. But going forward, we are going to stick with our proven winners Caladiums, and our site plan is going to look something like this. So we've got the urn in the middle, and then radiating off of that, we have our arms, 15 feet on each side. So we've got Clowning Around in the back, Tickle Me Pink, Chinook in the pocket, and Lemon Blush on the corners. So we've already mapped out our urns. We have an urn with Lemon Blush and Chinook. We chose to go all Chinook with our medium pot. There's a medium blue pot. And for our small blue pot, we're going to use our leftover Tickle Me Pink. Now in this site plan, it's a large plan. Maybe you only have a 15-foot site plan that you're working with. Well, we'll just narrow it down. We have Lemon Blush, Clowning Around, Tickle Me Pink, and then maybe a container of Lemon Blush with a Tickle Me Pink Thriller. So there you have it. We've talked about an introduction to Caladiums and the two different types, the fancy and the strap, how to determine what kind of sun exposure you have for your space. We have chosen a space for our project in the display garden, and we have got our varieties picked out with a multi-level plan in mind. So stay tuned for part 2 of 8 in this 8-part series, where we're going to map out project costing and ordering from ClassicCaladiums.com and choosing your shipping zone, so we'll know when to ship you your Caladiums when it's time for you to plant in your area. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.